Guys, Vigilant Shemrock has officially been revealed in one of the coldest panels in recent One Piece history, and wow, this guy is gonna be a menace with some seriously intimidating aura. And what's maybe most shocking about his introduction to me though, is that Oda might have dropped a really big shocking hint that Shanks and Shemrock have a potential third sibling as well, which might be crazy to think about, but it gets even better than just that, because based on his introduction, Shemrock is clearly also gonna be just stupidly powerful. Though the real question, of course, is exactly how strong is Shemrock Vigilant gonna be? Is he Yonko level? Is he beyond that? And what are his actual powers? Well, I do think I might have some answers for you, but that's not all that we got from this chapter, which was crazy hype, let's be real, because yet again we learned some other shocking lore about the ancient world that goes against so much of what we previously thought about the geography of the One Piece world as well. And on top of that, we might just have landed another W with our previous Nika theory, and I'll be breaking down all of that and even more in this chapter in just a moment, but first, of course, I gotta talk about my boy here, Shemrock. Okay, and man, let me just tell you, this is the second super hype character introduction in, just the first couple of chapters that we had in this arc, following, of course, Loki's reveal, and Oda, let's just say, did not exactly disappoint. Once again, let's just appreciate this panel for a moment. Like, dang it, this might be the most stylish man I've ever seen in One Piece, and that actually says something. We have some stylish people. But beyond just his basic design, one of the most intriguing things I think about this whole reveal might actually be his name. Because after looking into it a little bit, there are two things in particular I want to check here. Firstly is the meaning of his name, of course. As you should well know by now, Oda is of course very intentional about the names that he gives his characters, so I did do some research into any clues that the name Shemrock could give us about the character, and here's a possible really cool connection that I found. Because in case you don't know, Shemrock is a major symbol of the nation of Ireland, and the name itself has its roots in an Irish word meaning young clover. Clover? I guess clover is maybe the correct pronoun. Anyways, at first I wondered if he was actually the son of Professor Clover, but just of course that doesn't make any sense at all. So at first I wondered if there was any connection to Professor Clover here, but that maybe doesn't make too much sense. So instead I did some more digging, and here's what I found. It turns out that the Shemrock, the actual little three-leaf plant here, is often used as a metaphor for the Christian Holy Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And as the guy who just posted a whole video on Bible peas, my mind of course went completely wild reading this, because as you know, there is so much symbolism in One Piece, for starters around the number 3, with Blackbeard's connection to the number, the 3 main types of devil fruits, the 3 types of hockey, the 3 legendary trees, and so on. I could go on forever here. So if the number 3 is important to the Vigilant family, and we also know that Oda loves his biblical references, and keeping in mind that this could of course just be referring to Garling as the father, then Shanks and Shemrock as 2 sons, but just wait a second, because what if that wasn't actually the case here? What if instead of father and 2 sons, there are actually 3 Vigilant siblings? That's right, I'm talking about Triplets, our favorite thing in One Piece, or at least another brother or maybe even a sister in addition to Shanks and Shemrock. Because I mean, how wild would that be to not only have a second monster, Yonko level Shanks twin here, but potentially a third one as well? And while of course we're gonna have to wait and see if there's any more evidence potentially pointing in that direction, it would of course be a real twist that I could absolutely see Oda pulling off in the future. But it gets even better here, because one theory that I found in the Japanese community could actually explain exactly how Shanks might have gotten separated from his family in the first place. Because remember, if Shanks and Shemrock are both Garling's sons, then you have to wonder how he only ended up losing Shanks back during the God Valley flashback. And as we learned in Film Red, Shanks ended up being picked up by the Roger crew after the battle in God Valley, so the theory here goes that Garling brought all his kids, 2 or 3 or maybe even more, with him to the hunt at God Valley. But then of course, once the Rocks Pirates and Roger and everyone showed up and the battle began, Garling, or maybe Shanks' mother, actually ended up hiding the kids within some of the treasure chests that were holding the prizes of the tournament, these legendary devil fruits. And one of the main pieces of evidence for this theory is this panel right here, where Garling could be talking to his multiple sons as he's about to show off his fighting abilities. Now of course he could just be talking to the other young holy knights as well, but I do think that doesn't really make sense, since in Japanese he actually says kodomo tachi, like on purpose putting the plural there and saying saying children, plural, which makes a lot more sense if he's talking to his actual children. And of course, don't forget that we know for a fact that Roger found Shanks within one of the treasure chests, so maybe Roger took that one, Garling just managed to get his hands on another one, and that's why he retrieved Shemrock, and then Roger got Shanks. But now another really interesting part about Shemrock Figurland's name is that there's actually something missing in his name itself, or at least that's what I thought coming into this, because clearly Shemrock's father Garling is a world noble, and we were pretty much told as much while he was introduced, and he has the classic world noble title of Saint. And it doesn't seem like that's a recent addition to Garling's name either, because he had it all the way back, again, in this panel during the God Valley flashback as well. But it seems like that title is completely missing from Shemrock's name. I mean, same with Gunko and her formal introduction last chapter as well, so why exactly is that? Why do they not have the Saint title like all the other world nobles? Or did Oda just forget it? And if you know anything about me, of course, I'm just gonna go and speculate a little bit here, because there's really only one answer that makes a lot of sense to me, and it is such a fitting parallel with what we learned this chapter about Hyrule mother, which we'll touch on in just a moment as well. But just consider for a moment what we actually know about the world nobles and their children, because we do know that the world nobles' children can have the same title, since Charlos here and his sister had the title way back during the Sabaody arc already, and they're also confirmed to be the children of Saint Roswald. So the only real answer, apart from Oda just not putting it there, must be that Shemrock himself is not a full-blooded world noble. Like, maybe his father is, but perhaps his mother was not a world noble, which means that Shemrock did not inherit the title of Saint himself. And interestingly enough, this would actually really fit in nicely with what we learned about Bonnie's twisted past as well, of course, where her mother Ginny was kidnapped, forced to have a child with a world noble, and then abandoned. And Bonnie obviously doesn't have the Saint title either, so that kind of leads me to assume that the world nobles don't really care as much about their children unless they are straight up full-blooded celestial dragons. Which, if that's true, is just vile and repulsive in a lot of ways, as is so much with the world noble, but that's really the only real way that I can think of that explains why Shemrock might not have that title, though at the same time, apparently becoming a Holy Knight would make Loki like a world noble, so I'm not exactly sure how that would actually all work out. But since we're talking about it, what's even crazier maybe is that there is some evidence pointing to the fact that Bonnie might potentially be part of the Figurland family as well, and maybe even that lost third sibling that we've been talking about for just a moment. Yes, I know, Bonnie being like the half-sister of Shanks or his like niece sounds wild, but hear me out for a second. Because if you look at this really interesting gender swap of all the supernova that Oda drew a few years ago, the male version of Bonnie like sure looks a lot like Shanks and Shemrock, or is that just me? So could she be the missing third sibling that we discussed earlier, or could she actually be Shemrock's daughter? Because that of course could lead to a really insane confrontation later on in this arc, since Bonnie and Kuma, don't forget, are here in Elbaf as well. And again, we do know for a fact that Bonnie is Ginny's and a random celestial dragon's child, so she is half celestial dragon one way or another. But then again, if that were to be true, then we kind of also have to wonder if Gunko has a similarly mixed lineage as well, and maybe that is the case with all of the Holy Knights potentially. Maybe they're all actually half celestial dragon children who were kept and trained instead of being cast out, but they actually need to go out and fight and stuff and protect the celestial dragons. And if they were to be raised in Marejua, well, that would also explain why Gunko and Shemrock have the typical superior attitude that all the world nobles have as well. And so it looks to me like they weren't recruited to join the Holy Knights like so many people have wondered after the last chapter. They were probably just straight up raised into their ranks. Which, I mean, all of this is just kind of incredible that we can now finally talk about his real name. Stop. Like, I mean, I kind of liked fake Shanks, but, you know, Shemrock's pretty cool too, I guess. And I do know that some people in the community were pretty disappointed and think that the name is pretty lame, but honestly, I'm just glad that we don't have to keep calling him fake Shanks or Banks or Shanks or whatever other names were floating around out there, as fun as they were. However, one thing that I don't think anyone will debate though is that clearly Shemrock is going to be beyond broken. Because with as powerful as Gunko herself is turning out to be, he has got to be even more powerful since he's ranked as the leader of the Holy Knights. And come on, he's Shanks' brother probably, so I mean, he's gotta be really broken. But now let's talk about something that no one will be disappointed about, because this chapter has also revealed the Holy Knight's true plan in Elbaf, and as Shemrock explains to us, his goal is to just straight up take full control of Elbaf and force them to join the world government. worlds. And I guess props to him, it does seem like he wanted to do this in a much smarter way than just straight up brute force, maybe by having Loki join them and then making him king of Elbaf, kind of pulling the strings. But since Loki, like, props to him also, straight up refused to cooperate, I'm kind of really curious how he now intends to do this. Maybe he's having Gunko call Marijoa to ask for reinforcements, which could mean that we get even more reveals of the full Holy Knight squad very soon. But then again, even if that were to be the case, if the Holy Knights think that they can conquer all of Elbaf with only Shemrock and Gunko and a few other of the Holy Knights, couldn't they have just done that years ago if they really wanted to? Or maybe it's because pirates like Luffy and Blackbeard are now way closer than ever to finding the One Piece that they're willing to take a risk here? Or, which I think would be the most hilarious option, maybe Imo was just straight up so freaked out by Joy Boy's Haki Blast that they're just really stepping up their world domination agenda here and putting down their foot. Or who knows, maybe it's just straight up Garling who sent out his own son here since he was obviously just promoted to be one of the Gorosei himself. But with all of that being said here, I'm still not completely ruling out an idea that we've already talked about in some past videos, because I still think that it's very much possible that the world government somehow has influenced the old King Harold into turning the nation into this pacifist country so that they could eventually come in and have a much easier time conquering the islands. No real world implications to this. Anyways, this would explain why they're arriving right now when the island has fewer warriors instead of, years ago when basically every single giant was a powerful warrior trained, since their childhood to be some of the most broken people in the entire One Piece world. Alright, but stop, hold on for a second. Things get even better with this chapter when we go back all the way to the start, I think, because the Elbaf lore train just keeps on delivering, and this time it is Road out of all people dropping some new deep knowledge on King Harold and the ancient giant race as well. Because as Road now tells us, the ancient giant bloodline has actually long been mixed in with Elbaf blood as well, and apparently certain giants even get horns that are symbols of this heritage, horns that of course we know all too well. And I think we just gotta stop here for a moment, because obviously we do know some of the ancient giants like Ors who had those very same horns, but the really confusing thing has always been if normal giants have horns or not, because so many of the giant warriors do wear their Viking helmets. It's kind of hard to tell if horns like these are straight up real horns and they kind of put them through the holes in their helmet, which would be really funny, or if they're just basically decoration. But even if some of the giants just have helmets with horns on them, clearly some giants do have real horns, as we now learn with King Harold, and also some of the giant skeletons that we see in this very chapter. And so I guess kind of my main question with all of this is, do the horns mean that a giant is actually more powerful? Like, that be the assumption? Like, when they have more ancient giant blood in them, are they just straight up more powerful? And to be honest, that could explain why some giants are called great warriors and someone like Loki is considered a true monster. Well, at least if we assume that his horns are real, which again, I don't know how that would work with the helmets, but maybe they just fit them on there once around the horns. I have no idea. And on top of that, I'm of course also just wondering how the true ancient giant lineage got wiped out in the first place. Like, was Ors Jr. the last of the ancient giants and also the smallest? Like, did their bloodline just get way too mixed up with other races? Or was the ancient giant race maybe wiped out in a major world event, and there were only a few people who survived it of that race who then mixed with other tribes? Just looking at the Lunarians, for example, another really dominant race that used to rule the world, and the same thing happened to them, so I think that might be very likely, especially with what we theorized in our Titan Piece video right here. And I will say, to me, that certainly seems like the most possible option here, because yet another lore drop about the ancient giants actually came from Shemrock at the very end of this chapter. Because according to him, apparently at one time in the past, the giants of Elbaf actually conquered the entire new world, and at first this doesn't seem all that surprising, but to me it really stands out for two big reasons. Firstly, again, I recently made this whole video about the ancient giants / titans who once might have ruled the One Piece world before the Lunarians came, so this entire idea fits in just beautifully with that theory, especially since we speculated in that video that the ancient giants might have originated from Elbaf as well. But secondly, did the actual new world as a part of the Grand Line even exist in the ancient past? Because you have to remember at this point, the new world is the second part of the Grand Line, and it's just this thin strip of ocean between the calm belts, but we also do know that the world was flooded at least once, probably twice, and maybe even more often than that. So was the new world of the past like the same new world that we have in One Piece right now? I feel like it kind of can't be, right? I mean, surely the ocean levels rising 200 meters would have just completely changed the current and flow of the ocean, so what exact new world did the Elbaf giants conquer in the past? Now, of course, Shemrock might just be referring to a time after the Void Century where the Elbaf giants conquered the Grand Line, but that's not exactly the impression that I got right here. So maybe another theory that we talked about could be true, where the Grand Line was the original Red Line, but then it got flooded, so someone built a new Red Line on top of everything. That could be interesting. Or maybe, you know, the new world was just all land at that point. However, back to topic. With all of this talk about ancient giants, we also can't forget about the other extremely powerful rays with horns, and those are, of course, the long-rumored Oni Rays. And of course, the former Emperor Kaido and Yamato are pretty much the only real confirmed members of the Oni Rays, and confirmed is also kind of stretching it. And so at this point, I'm kind of wondering if they just straight up have ancient giant ancestors and the Oni Rays isn't really a thing. Like, that, for example, would explain the horns and why they're just so freakishly big and powerful. Plus, we already know that giants can have children with humans because of Ripley, so it's very likely, I think, that Kaido does have some ancient giant blood in his lineage, which again was foreshadowed so much with the numbers and like the skull that looked like him in Punk Hazard and Onigashima, which of course makes his comment to Yamato in chapter 1025 even more interesting because remember, he tells her that Onis are meant to rule. So when he says Oni, does he just know some old history about when the ancient giants / Onis ruled the very world? Again, just some more interesting speculation I think here, but I really hope that we do get to, you know, see some answers to this very soon. And also, I just gotta point it out, Harold in this portrait here looks a lot like Kaido. Is that just me? I feel like there is like the beard and the way he looks, and imagine him with his horns. I don't know, man, but we can talk about that later, I guess. Now, there is yet another unbelievable secret that we learn about from this section at the castle, and that is the fact that Loki and Jarul are, interestingly enough, the only two survivors from this massive fight that apparently happened between Harold and Loki. Road actually tells us that during this attack, supposedly 100 of the giant guards were killed by Loki, but somehow Jarul, out of all people, managed to survive, which again is very suspicious to me. I mean, out of everyone, this old-timer is the only giant to survive this? Come on, there has to be a little bit more going on here than we're being told. And honestly, at this point, I feel like I'll just pretty much die on the hill that Loki isn't just a purely bad guy who murdered his father just for power, because like I just think he's a good guy. I think he got framed, and I can't be the only one thinking this, right? And I think I might have to do a whole separate video on why I think that Loki got betrayed. I don't think I can fit it into just the chapter review. But okay, let's just say for a moment that Loki did actually kill those 100 giants by himself, then his power level is of course truly out of this world, because just one giant is pretty powerful on their own, as we know, but 100 of them plus King Harold, who's supposedly a great warrior himself, like, man, I just gotta say, if this just ends up being true, I can't wait to really see Loki in action. And so with all of that power, it kind of makes it even more amazing that Gunko is able to just straight up knocking out Colt. Now, look, I do know that Loki is tied up here and he literally can fight back and use his powers, but with characters on Loki's level, you kind of have to have truly absurd amounts of strength to even slightly be able to damage them at all. And so the fact that Gunko here dealt such heavy damage to Loki kind of tells me that she is also not someone to mess around with at all. And can we just appreciate her powers here for a moment? Like, this is a crazy creative power, I think. Because, you know, if I told someone in the past that a character would have the Aro no Mi, which basically translates as the arrow human, then I personally don't think that they'd picture her having arrows that telegraph the future and arrows that she can form into giant solid boots and gloves for dealing massive blows. Unless, of course, that entire future shenanigan thing is actually Loki having like next level future side, but again, we can maybe talk about that in a different video, but that would be crazy. Going back to Gunko, it even seems like she can literally shoot out arrows, which is kind of what we see sticking out of the animals at the end of the chapter as well, which, I mean, like, you know, there was a whole, they made like 4 movies of John Wick just based on like one dog getting killed, so Loki better be going crazy with all his animal friends now being dead. With all of that being said though, I would be very confused about the whole thing with telegraphing her own attacks if that's what's actually going on. Like, how would that even be useful? Wouldn't that make things way easier to dodge? Unless it's a truly can't miss ability, and just literally straight up no one can stop her attacks, and I'm pretty sure that we'll see what it's like against the top tier fighters very soon, but I can just imagine arrows flying all around Luffy, dodging them, or, you know, Zoro cutting them apart to kind of try stopping her attacks. Again, unless this is straight up Loki having like next level future sight haki looking like minutes into the future, and maybe, you know, honestly, that would explain why Shanks has the future sight killing haki thing, because otherwise maybe he would have had no chance against Loki, who can just see the future. That's kind of interesting to think about. Anyways, what kind of shocked me here though was the confirmation also that Gunko does have a devil fruit, which kind of rules out what I speculated in the last chapter about her having some sort of yokai-like powers that she got from Imu. And since Gunko has a confirmed devil fruit, it's kind of more likely now that the other Holy Knights, of course, have devil fruits as well, though again, it's kind of weird that we never got devil fruit confirmations for the Gorosei whatsoever, so that mystery is still very much alive, I think. And then, of course, how do we explain the summoning circles that we saw when they first arrived on Alba? Like, clearly, this is gonna need some sort of explanation, because at this point, it kind of seems like anyone can use this power even without receiving powers directly from Imu, unless it's like a completely separate thing. So, is this some sort of technology that they only have in Marijua, or is it someone else's devil fruit power? I'm kind of dying to find out at this point, not gonna lie. And another thing that I was pretty sad that we didn't get to learn in this chapter though, is if Loki actually managed to see Shemrock's face or not. Because if you paid attention to the chapter, Shemrock didn't fully reveal himself until after Loki was knocked out. So still very possible that Loki didn't see that the Holy Knight looks exactly like Shanks. And of course he also has the bandages over his eyes, but with Loki you never know if he's not able to see anyways, which again is a little bit disappointing. I really kind of wanted to know what Loki would have said if he saw this person who looked just a lot like Shanks. Would Loki be mad or confused, or would he just react in a completely different way? I'm honestly not sure, and I guess we're just gonna have to keep waiting, because I would guess that Loki would have given us information here, which Oda probably straight up just does not want us to have at this point. Now, another piece of interesting lore that was pretty easy to overlook in this chapter, I think, might actually completely change the timeline for what we thought happened in Elbaf, because out of nowhere we just dropped the fact that King Harold was killed 14 years ago. Like, what? Is this a mistranslation or something, or a mistake? Because I guess we've all been assuming that the battle between Loki and King Harold took place around 6 years ago, since that's when Loki was captured. But now it seems like that may not be the case at all, because if Harold died 14 years ago, that kind of means that there was 8 whole years between when Harold died and Loki was being caught by Shanks. So what in the world was he doing for 8 years? Clearly the giants hated him, so I can't imagine that he would have been just staying around in Elbaf. So does that mean he was out at sea for 8 years? If that's the truth, then pretty amazing that we never heard about him anywhere else beside Whole Cake Island, because a giant as devastating and powerful as Loki, I mean, come on, would have surely done something very remarkable during 8 years out on the Grand Line. No? And on top of that, honestly, all of that just kind of adds to my confusion about the whole situation with Loki potentially marrying Lola. Like, how does that part fit into anything that we've learned about Loki so far? Because if he has really been out here terrorizing Alba for most of his life, and he was potentially out at sea for another 8 years, then when in the world would he have even had time to, 1, meet Lola, and 2, basically promise the entire strength of Elbaf to help Big Mom? Like, again, with all these puzzle pieces, the timelines just aren't super adding up to me. We do know that Loki went out to sea sometime after he supposedly killed his father, but even if that was 14 years ago, Loki certainly wouldn't have been in a position to make an alliance between Big Mom and the rest of Elbaf, right? So did he go out to sea another time in his life before that, or did Lola visit Elbaf at some point? Honestly, at this point, we aren't really sure what's going on, but with all of the strangeness around the situation, I wouldn't be surprised myself at all to learn that something was set up here or faked, or someone promised Loki, but Loki didn't even know about. Like, there are some shenanigans happening here. Again, probably meant for the other video. Gonna hope to get that out maybe like 2 days from now. Keep an eye out for that. But yeah, and honestly, that's not even the only controversy that Road revealed in this chapter, because we have another brand new conspiracy in the land of the giants as well. Because as Road explains to Luffy, Nami, and Zoro here, the princes Loki and Hyrule are actually only half-brothers, not straight up full brothers like most of us, I guess, kind of assumed. Meaning, if you paid attention in biology and math, I guess, there were 2 different mothers here, and of course, Hyrule is actually older than Loki, so his mother had a baby with the old King Harald, before then the king eventually married Loki's mother, I guess. But what's actually a little bit controversial here is that we also learned that Hydrogen's mother was never going to be accepted as Queen of Elbaf because turns out she's from an entirely different giant country altogether. And the giants of Elbaf apparently only want a full-blooded Elbaf woman to be their queen, and we've also heard about these other giant countries before, from Saul if I'm correct, but I'm still kind of actually shocked by this level of discrimination that the giants of Elbaf have against the other giants from the rest of the world. I mean, if Harald wanted to marry this giant woman, he should be able to do that, right? He's the king. And it's even more surprising since we do know that Harald already went against Elbaf tradition by basically turning the entire country into a peace-loving nation, going against the last 800 years of what they've been doing since the Void Century at least. So clearly we should then assume that Loki's mother was a giant woman who was native to Elbaf, but again, that just raises another question. What happened to Hydrogen's mom? Like, was she just sent back to her home country? Was she killed to make way for Harald to marry Loki's mother, or did Loki's mother do something to get her out of the way? I'm telling you, my entire conspiracy theory radar is working overdrive during this entire arc, and I've just seen too many stories where royals will conveniently die so that another person can take their place. There's a lot of fishy stuff going on with Loki's what I'm saying here. We're gonna make the video. Anyways, baseline is, I'm really surprised to learn about this possible controversy in Elbaf history, but the thing that I want to focus on mostly here is the contrast between the past and the present of both Loki and Hydrogen here, because this chapter cranked my interest level in their relationship way up as well. Because just listen to this. As we learn in this chapter, Hydrogen himself was insulted for much of his childhood because of his half-blood nature. Half-blood as in, like, I mean, he's not even half-giant, he's just half-Elbaf giant. Again, I mean, talk about racism. But he's seemingly grown up to now be the favored prince by the rest of the giants at this point. And on the other hand, Loki was apparently born as a full-blooded Elbaf giant, being the prince, even though he was the younger brother, and was most likely considered to be the real heir to Harald's throne. And yet, that entire situation pretty quickly reversed as he became more and more despised as he grew older, right up until the point where he allegedly killed his own father. So just to summarize, Hydrogen goes from being made fun of to then being the favorite son and prince, while Loki goes from the hope of the entire nation to a so-called cursed prince and the shame of Elbaf. And on top of that, it does seem like Loki actually inherited his father's ancient giant blood, which we can assume because, well, it does appear like Loki has horns, or a really cool helmet. While of course on the other hand, Hydrogen here did probably not inherit much of the ancient giant DNA whatsoever. But that's not even all the contrasts between the two, because even their dreams are just completely opposite. As we've now established, I think over and over again, Loki wants to destroy the world. And then you have Hydrogen here, who we learn in this chapter has a dream of uniting all the countries of giants into one big nation and then becoming their king. Which honestly, I gotta say, it's a pretty fantastic dream and seems to be pretty nicely in line with the overall themes of One Piece. So really, there are just a ton of contrast set up between these two, and I honestly can't wait to see what happens with them and how they would interact, because as I've said in basically every recent chapter review, I don't believe that Loki is truly evil, and I think that there is so much more to his story than we're being told right now, so I just don't see it as Hydrogen is the good prince and Loki is the evil one. I think that we will get a much more nuanced storyline which might actually reveal each of the prince's true natures. Wait, hold on. Am I saying that Hydrogen will betray the Straw Hats? I mean, probably not, but really, I don't know. I kind of feel like at this point, anything is possible, because technically we don't really know Hydrogen at all, except for, like, he got saved by Usopp and by Luffy during Dressrosa, but do we know him as a person? Not really. Also, can I just point something out here quickly? We do know that King Harald had a child with 2 different women at this point, but who's to say he didn't have even more children? Because I'm just looking at this man right here and thinking, like, again, wow, he kind of looks a lot like Kaido, and with the strong, rugged features and the facial hair, he's basically Kaido if the former emperor Ohara removed his own horns and I guess went bald. I mean, look at this. Even the scales on Harold's armor are kind of similar to Kaido's scale tattoos. So yeah, I kind of wouldn't be surprised to find out that Harold possibly had even more children that he just sold off, especially since Kaido seemed to have the ancient giant horns as well. And who knows, maybe it was just Mother Caramel who straight up took Kaido and sold him into the West Blue. At this point, everything's possible. But I do want to stick here for a moment longer with Hyrule Dream and the other giant nations around the world, because we first learned that there were other nations of giants all the way back in chapter 392 from Saul here, because he clearly does not want to be known as a giant from Elbaf. So I hope I'm not the only one asking. I hope you're asking as well, where are those other giants from? And why have we never seen or heard of them before? Well, we might actually have gotten some clue from Saul's Vivre card information, which states that he was actually born in the South Blue. So I guess it's possible that there is an island full of giants in that ocean, but we don't really know much more at this point whatsoever. But it does still kind of make me wonder if visiting these other giant nations was Hyrujin's entire goal for setting out and becoming a pirate to begin with. Because if his dream is to unite all of the giants, then surely he would want to go meet them all in person, right? And actually explore all these islands. However, it might actually not be that easy for Hyrule to unite the giants, because we already know from Saul that these other giants don't exactly like the giants of Elbaf because of their past violent nature, so they might just straight up have rejected Hyrule because of just that. And so now I'm kind of actually wondering, guys, if that is the whole point for Harold's plan to make Elbaf a more peaceful nation. Like maybe his real endgame goal was to unite all the giant nations, and becoming more peaceful was just kind of the first step to get closer. But then there's an even bigger problem that I'm wondering about, because clearly the world government values giant soldiers, right? They have many of them in the Marines, and even Saul himself is a former vice admiral. So what if these other giant nations have already joined or have been conquered by the world government? I mean, it's certainly possible, since the world government fears the giant strength so much. So if Hyrule does want to unite all the giants in one kingdom, he might straight up have to win the others back from the world government. Which, now that I think about it, could actually explain some of his past actions as well, such as joining Buggy's pirate crew and trying to get stronger by winning the Mira Mira no Mi in Dressrosa, you know, all the things that he did there. And I guess maybe he was just trying to do all of this because Hyrule himself doesn't have as much of the legendary ancient giant blood to make him as strong as Loki, because clearly, based on what we saw in Dressrosa, Hyrule is, sorry to say, not all that powerful. Like, Luffy 1KO'd him. Certainly not compared with the reputation of his father and his half-brother here, which could explain his own desire to eat a powerful devil fruit. Obviously though, we do know that he couldn't get his hands on this one, but we can't say the same for Loki, who we do know ate the legendary fruit of Elbaf. And I'm kind of worried that Loki may not even have this fruit for long here, because as we speculated in the past, I wouldn't be all that surprised to see Blackbeard show up and come looking for a third legendary devil fruit. And I gotta say, right now, without even knowing what it is, Loki's looks like a pretty sweet option. But I just kind of have to stop you there, because recently I actually found a really insane theory on the Japanese, One Piece community that kind of broke my brain, because it tried proving that Blackbeard can't even eat Loki's fruit to begin with, because he might already have a third devil fruit that he had from the beginning. But what's even crazier maybe is that Blackbeard might not even have been a human being to begin with, but actually a dog who loved his master, Roxy Zebek, and kind of then ate a human-type devil fruit. And if you want to see all of the wild evidence for this unbelievable Japanese theory, you can watch the video right below me. Believe me, it's really wild, but also really cool with all the classic, number plays and shenanigans. Otherwise, as always, thanks so much for watching. Shout out to the Patreons. You guys really are helping out, like with all the crazy art stuff, and you make the videos as nice as they are, I think. Appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Also, Ryan George, please don't sue me for the Admiral. Thank you.